Hey everyone, just a quick disclaimer before we get started. My builds are designed to be able to do Steel Path, but that doesn't necessarily mean they will suit everyone's needs or personal preferences. There's a huge variety of ways to adjust builds, but this guide will give you a good starting point to be able to use the frame effectively. We'll start with the basics, like stats and how to use the frame, then we'll move into the builds. With that out of the way, let's get started. Starting with Protea's stats. First and foremost, there is no prime for this frame at the moment. Armor is 125, which puts you at 29.4% damage reduction towards the health stat. Not a great base armor stat, but also not the lowest. Keep in mind she isn't a prime, so overall this could be worse. For energy, we have 150. This puts you at 225 at max. 150 is a pretty good base energy stat, which is great to have considering how much she spams abilities. For health, you're looking at a pretty basic 100. This puts you at 300 at max. For shields, we have 150, which puts you at 450 at max. Definitely one of the better shield stats in the game, which is good because one of her abilities gives shields and overshields, and even a longer shield gate. For sprint speed, you're looking at a pretty high 1.2, but obviously sprint speed isn't too important as things like bullet jump and rolling are usually faster anyway. She doesn't have many scenarios where sprinting would be better than just doing a quick bullet jump or a roll. In terms of polarities, Protea comes with an aura Forma, which allows for any polarity to be installed in the aura for the full bonus. This is pretty good to have by default. She also comes with one default Materite and Nariman. In terms of acquisition, you'll need to run Grand Void missions on Corpus ships to acquire her parts. The main blueprint is acquired from the Deadlock Protocol quest. I linked her full acquisition in the description. Moving on to her abilities, starting with the passive. Every 4th power cast is granted plus 100% ability strength. This is definitely one of the stronger passives in the game, so you cast 3 abilities, and then the next is boosted by 100% ability strength. Keep in mind this is additive to the current strength. This passive affects all of her abilities in some way due to them all using strength. Moving on to her first ability, Grenade Fan. Throw out grenades in an arc. You tap for the Shrapnel Vortex, which creates a slashing, staggering swirl of shrapnel, and you hold for Shield Satellites. Protea reconfigures grenades to work as overcharging shield generators, protecting her, her allies, and companions. When shields break, a satellite is destroyed to extend the period of invulnerability, which is just the shield gate I was mentioning earlier. So you tap to cast for a damage grenade, hold to cast for shield grenades. You can invert this behavior in your control settings where it says invert tap/hold abilities. When you tap to cast, Protea throws 3 grenades in front of her on the ground at a 45, 90, and 135 degree angle. They do not attach to walls and will fall down until coming into contact with a horizontal surface. Once activated, they deal damage in a radius around where they landed. Damage is slash with a 33% status chance and a 100% chance to stagger enemies either slightly or strongly on every hit, making this a decent crowd control. If you're not sure what status chance is, go ahead and check out my guide on that linked in the top right and in the description. When you hold to cast, Protea throws 4 grenades at a 45, 65, 115, and 135 degree angle. They do not attach to walls and will fall down until coming into contact with a horizontal surface. Once they are on the ground, they float in the area and will seek out an ally within the grenade's radius. Upon grabbing, they instantly restore some shields and then continue to restore every second while active. When your shields break, the drone that was giving you shields breaks, and when it does, it gives your shield gate an extra 2 seconds of invulnerability. If you don't know what shield gate is, it is simply the 1.3 seconds of invulnerability to damage you get whenever your shield breaks. 0.3 seconds if your shields haven't recharged all the way since regenerating. All frames have this, but this ability extends it. This ability is pretty good to help survivability a bit. The last thing to keep in mind is that Shrapnel Vortex damage contributes damage to Temporal Anchor recorded damage, which I explain further when I go over that ability. In terms of modding for this ability, Drain is affected by ability efficiency, Duration is affected by ability duration, while Radius is affected by ability range. Grenade damage, Grenade bonus shield on activation, and shield per second is affected by ability strength. Moving on to her second ability, Blaze Artillery. Deploys an artillery unit to blast plasma charges at enemies it faces. Each enemy hit increases the power of subsequent plasma attacks. So you cast this and Protea deploys the turret aiming at the target reticle. The turret then acquires enemies in a 130 degree cone in front of the turret within range. It fires at a rate of 180 per minute, or 3 per second, adding 100% damage for each successful shot. You can see this multiplier bonus behind the turret. She can have up to 3 turrets at once, and they have their own multiplier for each. It has a guaranteed fire proc, and if an enemy behind another enemy is targeted, it hits all enemies in the way. Because of the guaranteed fire proc, enemies will be stunned temporarily when hit. Blaze artillery damage contributes damage to temporal anchor recorded damage, which I will explain further when I go over that ability. In terms of modding for this ability, Drain is affected by ability efficiency, damage is affected by ability strength, duration is affected by ability duration, and range is affected by ability range. Moving on to her third ability, Dispensary, deploys a device that generates 3 pickups after a short delay, Empowered Health Orb, Universal Ammo Pack, and an Energy Orb. So Protea deploys a device that generates pickups in a certain order on rotation. Initially, it will drop an Empowered Health Orb, Universal Ammo, and then an Energy Orb in that order. Then, if an item is used, the next item that drops will replenish the one that was used and trigger a 5-second cooldown. Every time the dispenser drops an item, it has a chance to drop double the items. Pickups that are dropped by Dispensary are instants per player rather than the whole squad. So if I use an Energy Orb but a teammate uses ammo, they'll get the ammo drop next, and I'll still get the Energy Orb. Each drop is per player as well. You can't see other people's pickups and thus won't risk picking up someone else's item. Lastly, it's worth keeping in mind if you use this ability with her passive bonus strength, it will add 25% extra pickup chance for that cast, since the base value of it is 25%. In terms of modding for this ability, Drain is affected by ability efficiency, duration is affected by ability duration, and extra pickup chance is affected by ability strength. This is also Protea's subsumed ability when given to the Helminth. Moving on to her fourth ability, Temporal Anchor, drops a Temporal Anchor, which, after a short duration, Protea rewinds to trigger a Temporal Implosion. Implosion damage increases based on damage dealt between Anchor drop and rewind. Everything lost or expended in that time is returned. Dying while Anchor is active rewinds Protea to the Anchor, saving her. Protea is knocked down and the Anchor vanishes. So you cast to place the Anchor. After the duration runs out, you will rewind to the position it was casted. Whenever it is casted, there is a 3-second status immunity and invulnerability. At the point it was cast, it saves all ammo, energy, shield, and health points, so when you rewind, it goes back to what it was when you initially cast it. Keep in mind that it still consumes the energy from actually using the ability. During the period it is active, it stores damage dealt, which is then unleashed as blast damage to all enemies within range and line of sight around Protea when it expires. Upon rewinding, enemies are also knocked down in the area. When the duration of the ability runs down to 1.5 seconds, the ability makes a ticking noise so you are aware the rewind is going to happen. This is nice because if you decide you don't want to rewind, you can simply hold the ability to cancel it. This is a really good mechanic because typically we always want this ability active without the annoyance of being constantly rewinded. Additionally, it can save Protea from taking lethal damage. This ability essentially gives her the ability to always get out of death for nearly free. In terms of modding for this ability, Drain is affected by ability efficiency, duration is affected by ability duration, recorded damage conversion is affected by ability strength, and the implosion range is affected by ability range. Moving on to Protea's Augments. Augments are mods that modify a frame's ability and are acquired from syndicates. If you're looking how to get started on syndicates, the link is in the top right pop-up, as well as the description. The first and only augment we have is Repair Dispensary. Dispensary Augment. Hold to create a dispensary that will revive the Sentinel or companion MOA of a player within 14 meters every 60 seconds. So you hold the cast, and the dispensary will revive a robot companion within 14 meters, which is affected by range. Once it does this, it will go on a 60-second cooldown for each person individually. While this isn't a terrible thing to have and fits in the Exilus, I don't run into many situations where I would need this. At this point in the video, I like to answer the question, is this frame Steel Path viable? Can it run arbitrations? Is it part of the Eidolon hunts? Well, I wouldn't use her on Eidolon hunts, but Protea can easily do Steel Path and makes arbitrations a lot less scary. Protea is easily one of the strongest frames I've seen. She has a very point defense styled role where she absolutely demolishes anyone that enters her turret's line of sight. Being able to summon energy orbs and even health orbs has great uses in a variety of situations. Her turrets do a ton of damage, Grenade Fan has crowd control as well as her turret's fire procs, and Temporal Anchor can prevent deaths. Overall, I'd say she's balanced well, but absolutely deadly in the right hands. Her short duration on her turrets makes her a big ability spammer, and takes a bit of brainpower to use all of her abilities together effectively, so this style may not be for everybody. Going over the builds, starting with my point defense build. This build, as the name implies, is just a point defense styled build. Focuses on tanking up and hunkering down, slowing and destroying enemies before they get too close to be a threat. Surprisingly, this build doesn't need to stand in a doorway to be effective, just choose any spot and go crazy. In terms of Helminth, you might consider keeping her ability stock. Temporal Anchor can be cancelled before the duration ends and rewinds you, which prevents deaths. However, Roar is an incredible option if you find yourself being good at shield gating or not dying. The damage from Roar is huge, as we'll be achieving a 101.7% Roar. To add to the craziness, Roar damage applies not once, but twice for her heat tick damage. So if my heat tick would be 497.5, it is multiplied by 101.7%, giving us 1003 damage, which is multiplied again by 101.7%, which gives us 2023. If you want to learn more about that, go ahead and check out my math status guide. The link is in the top right pop-up, as well as the description. In terms of Forma, you're looking at 5 or 6 Forma. You'll add 2 Vazarin, 2 Nariman, and 1 Matter-Eye. Optionally, if you have Prime Sure-Footed, you'll add an additional Vazarin to the Exilis. You won't replace any default polarities. If you're not sure what all this means, check out the link in the top right or description to get a tutorial on Formas. Going over the mods, starting with the Aura. I have enemy radar here because I like lots of map awareness, but if you're looking for more damage, corrosive projection will help quite a bit against armored targets. If you're running Circuit, I highly recommend Combat Discipline, as I normally use this build with the mod Synth Fiber to pick up health orbs endlessly with my companion, which isn't allowed in Circuit. Just be careful not to kill yourself with it. Moving on to the first main mod, I have Archon Vitality to get a bunch of health for our tankiness, but the Archon variant gives us an extra heat proc every time our turrets hit, effectively doubling our damage. This is incredibly good for obvious reasons, as most of our damage is coming from our Blaze Artillery, which is heat. Paired with that, I have Adaptation because this puts her at a ton of damage reduction, especially for incoming damage that is primarily made up of a certain type. Next, I have Health Conversion, and this is where the main damage reduction will be coming from. Health Conversion gives armor when picking up health orbs, which we'll be doing a ton of thanks to Dispensary and our companion with Sim Fiber to pick them up at max health, or alternatively Combat Discipline for a Circuit. Health Conversion gives 1350 armor on top of her 125 base, giving us 1475 armor, which nets us a very comfortable 83.1% reduction. When paired with Adaptation, this is giving us a max of 98.31% damage reduction, but being realistic with Adaptation, we'll likely be seeing the damage reduced by about 80% instead, since it only resists one type of damage of the enemy's potential multiple types. This still nets us a comfortable 96.62% damage reduction. Next up, we have Prime Continuity and Constitution for our duration. I used to use Narrow-Minded and Stretch here, but I find that having to use Cunning Drift to make up for the lack of range was underwhelming. With this config, we end up with slightly less duration than Narrow-Minded, but this only results in one less shot from her turret, so I'm willing to make the compromise to be able to open up that Exilis slot. If you don't have Prime Continuity, you can use regular Continuity if you want, instead of having to change polarities around for Narrow-Minded. It only results in 2 less shots from the turret compared to Prime Continuity when paired with Constitution. So you'll need to make that decision for yourself. Next is Equilibrium, which converts all those health pickups into juicy energy. We'll be getting a ton of health pickups from Dispensary, which results in great energy, and we'll need some place to store it, and that's where Prime Flow comes in. Lastly, for the main mods, I have Blind Rage. Unfortunately, this lowers her efficiency, but we have our ways to make up for it, of course. The low efficiency helps one of the Arcanes we'll be using. I like having the strength for when I'm using Roar as a subsume, but it also helps her Dispensary quite a bit, as well as shield regen for her 1. For the Exilis, I opted in to never be knocked down, because that is never fun to be killed by. Alternatively, you can use regular Sure-Footed or whatever you want until you get Prime Sure-Footed. In terms of Arcanes, you'll probably want Energize until you can get used to sustaining properly and keeping up Dispensary. Alternatively, you can use Arcane Steadfast if you don't have Energize. Once you get good at managing the energy, I'd recommend switching to Arcane Blessing because the extra health gives you a ton of extra survivability. Assuming a roughly 80% reduction from Adaptation and all of our health conversion armor, this puts us at almost 22k effective hit points, whereas adding this Arcane gives us roughly 57.4k, giving us more than 2.5 times more effective health. Sure, it may be complete overkill for most content, but it's safe to say you won't be hitting nearly as many surprise one-shots. For most content, you can run whatever makes you happy here. Pairing this high health and armor with Molt Reconstruct allows you to recover lost health on yourself and allies very fast. Molt Reconstruct is a ton of instant health for you and your team constantly because of how expensive the build is to use, thanks to Blind Rage. With a max Blind Rage, you're looking at 232 health restoration for your Grenade Fan, 465 for Blaze Artillery, and 697 for Dispensary. Your fourth will vary depending on your subsume ability or if you use her stock ability. In terms of Archon Shards, I like to avoid using these as a baseline so the builds are a bit easier to get into. Instead, I prefer to augment my existing build with them. In this case, I'd use 1 Amber Shard for starting energy and 4 Crimson Shards for duration. The starting energy really helps with getting your dispensary out right away with no delay, while the 40 to 60% duration will help her entire kit out in several ways. In terms of Misc requirements, you absolutely need a strong Sentinel that can use Synth Fiber. This mod lets you pick up health orbs regardless of your current health, which means you can get the equilibrium bonus every time your dispensary drops a big health orb. I personally use Death Cube with this build, and he usually stays alive easily on Steel Path. Burglass is the weapon I use on it, which is capable of stealing multiple kills, even on Steel Path with this build. I avoid regular pets, as when they go down, you lose the Synth Fiber buff, including when Vulpaphilas are in the revive state. In terms of Operator School, I would say Zenuric is probably a good pick initially, especially if you have a hard time keeping up with the energy while learning. While it's fully possible to sustain without it in Energize, it makes getting the hang of the build easier. Once you're used to sustaining energy properly, I highly recommend using Matter to get the buffs like 40% strength from Sling Strength ability and the 50% casting speed from the Power Transfer ability, which affects all of her casting speed as well as the rewind animation speed. The Sling Strength will work nicely on things like Roar and Dispensary. So quick how to use: right when you get in, you're going to need energy. Use Zenuric or a pad and then drop Dispensary when you can. Having an energy Archon shard helps with this significantly. Now you can place some turrets till you get a 100% strength boost, and if you're using Matter you want to be getting the Sling Strength buff for Roar and turret damage, and the extra casting speed is a decent quality of life. Now you can either Roar or drop a better Dispensary again with her passive. If you're using Temporal Anchor, just remember to keep shields active when you use it, for when you get knocked down on the rewind. If you don't die with the ability, you can simply cancel it early and recast to keep it active. It's basically a get out of death free card. Keep all your buffs active at all times, keep turrets covering all angles, and you should be just fine. Don't forget to camp around your dispensary. Like I said, it's a very point defense build, so you'll be a bit stationary. Let's go into some quick gameplay and see how it holds up at level 200 Steel Path. So here is the Conjunction Survival Circulus on Lua. Right as I start, I drop a pad, then I'm immediately going to drop my dispensary. I don't use the Archon Shards to show you can survive without it, it's just a bit more annoying. I'll do the typical setup, and I chose to recast Dispensary, so it gives me a bigger bonus. I'll start building up for the big roar with all my buffs, so I can be doing that insane turret damage. Pretty straightforward. It's worth keeping in mind that health conversion won't always be active, so you'll need to occasionally use your shields until your dispensary can give you health orbs to keep your armor maxed. Adaptation works nicely with shields, so you shouldn't have too many issues shield tanking. As you can see though, most enemies are stopped by the turrets, and those that aren't will have to deal with all the tankiness we have. The turret's damage is quite enough to never really need to touch your weapons, but I opted in to bring Latum and Glaive Prime just in case. All this being said, you should have an easy time understanding how this works, but I will be uploading the gameplay footage separately in case you want to see the full 20-minute run. The last build we have is my Turret Runner build. This build is the opposite of the other. It's meant to run and spam turrets. As such, it's weaker and not as tanky. This is more meant for regular star chart stuff to quickly clear stuff in a hurry. In terms of Helminth, Roar is an incredible option. Roar damage applies not once, but twice for her heat tick damage. If you want to learn more about that, go ahead and check out my math status guide. Link is in the description. In terms of Forma, assuming you want to be able to do my other builds, you're looking at 4. You'll add 2 Vazarin and 2 Nariman. You won't replace any default polarities. If you're not sure what all this means, check out the link in the description to get a tutorial on Formas. Going over the mods, starting with the Aura. I have enemy radar here because I like a lot of map awareness, but if you're looking for more damage, corrosive projection will help quite a bit against armored targets. Moving on to the first main mod, I have Archon Vitality to get a bunch of health for our tankiness, but mostly for the bonus it comes with. The Archon variant gives us an extra heat proc every time our turrets hit, effectively doubling our damage. This is incredibly good for obvious reasons, as most of our damage is coming from our Blaze Artillery, which is heat. Next, I have Overextended to allow our turrets to hit really far. These things have a good base range, and adding this kind of range really helps with usability over longer distances, which happens quite frequently. Unfortunately, this brings down our strength, which we don't want in the negative, which is why I'm using Umbral Intensify for 44% strength. Next up, we have Prime Continuity for our duration. While it's not a huge amount for her turrets, it's typically enough since we are blowing by enemies placing turrets constantly, so any extra duration is potentially wasted anyway. Next is Stretch for the same reason we use Overextended, but with no drawbacks. Range really helps when you need to hit things at a distance. Next, we have Streamline for the efficiency to be able to spam more abilities, paired with Prime Flow so we can have a bunch of energy reserve. Lastly, for the main mods, I have Augur Secrets, mostly to finish bringing our strength back up to a positive number. For the Exiles, I figured it would be good to have energy right at the start so we can get started right when we get in. We have this rank 7 out of 10 simply because my other build means I can't fit anything higher here. At rank 7, this provides 73% starting energy, which means the Archon Shard for starting energy we want for the other build pairs well with this mod. I'll get into the optional shards in a moment. In terms of Arcanes, you'll probably want Energize. Alternatively, you can use Arcane Steadfast if you don't have Energize. These just help keep our momentum going without running out of energy. Depending on the length of the mission, these may not even be needed. Next, I am using Molt Efficiency, but this is a flex spot. The added duration can help keep turrets down a bit longer. Arcane Guardian can also be good if you need some tankiness. The choice is really yours. In terms of Archon Shards, I like to avoid using these as a baseline so the builds are a bit easier to get into. Instead, I prefer to augment my existing build with them. In this case, I'd use 1 Amber Shard for starting energy and 4 Crimson Shards for duration. The starting energy really helps to be able to spam abilities right away, especially with no or low level preparation, while the 40 to 60% duration will help her entire kit out in several ways. In terms of Misc requirements, you really don't need anything, but in terms of Operator School, I would say Zenuric is probably a good pick if you find yourself running out of energy mid-mission. If you find yourself with more energy than you can use, you could try using Matter Eye to get the buffs like 40% strength from Sling Strength ability and the 50% casting speed from the Power Transfer ability, which affects all of her casting speed. The Sling Strength will work nicely on things like Roar and for some added turret damage. So a quick how to use, this build is super simple. Spam turrets at every enemy you see and watch the magic happen. This is mostly meant for mid-level missions, but can clear things like exterminates relatively fast, and could even work well for bounties. There's really not much else to say, and not much to show. You should be able to figure this one out, no problem. So that is the complete Protea guide. She's incredibly strong, and I can definitely recommend her. If you enjoyed the video, or it helped in any way, please leave a like, and if you're looking forward to future content like this, subscribe and stay tuned. If I missed anything, or you'd like to leave some feedback, leave it down in the comments. I appreciate all the support, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.